If you ever drive through a small town, never stay too long. Because some towns never let outsiders leave. This is what happened to Mason Virel when he stopped in a quiet little town called Hollow Creek. Mason Virel had been driving for hours. The night was dark, and the road seemed endless. His phone had no signal, and the GPS stopped working an hour ago. All he could hear was the soft hum of the engine, and the sound of crickets outside. The gas meter was almost empty. Mason felt a wave of panic. What if the car stops in the middle of nowhere? He gripped the steering wheel tighter and looked for any sign of a town. Finally, he saw something, a wooden sign on the side of the road. The paint was peeling, and the letters looked old and faded. It said, Hollow Creek, 5 miles. Mason sighed with relief. Thank God. At least there's a town nearby. He turned onto the narrow road leading to Hollow Creek. The trees on both sides looked strange, tall, twisted, and covered in shadows. The road was empty, not a single car in sight. As he drove deeper, the air felt heavier. The silence was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was like the world had stopped. Mason looked at the trees and felt like they were watching him. He tried to laugh it off. It's just a small town. Get gas, maybe some food, and leave. But deep inside, something felt wrong. The road curved, and in the distance, Mason saw dim yellow lights flickering. That must be the town. He pressed the accelerator a little, wanting to get there fast. Hollow Creek. It sounded harmless. But Mason had no idea. Once you enter Hollow Creek, you never leave. Mason slowly drove into Hollow Creek. The first thing he noticed was how old everything looked. The houses on both sides of the road had peeling paint and broken fences. Some windows were boarded up, and others had curtains that never moved. The street was completely empty. No people. No cars. Not even a dog barking. Just silence. Mason looked around, confused. Where is everyone? He expected to see at least a gas station or a store open. But the town felt frozen, like time had stopped years ago. After a few minutes, he spotted a small diner with a flickering neon sign that read open. The sign buzzed weakly, and the light blinked on and off. It was the only place that seemed alive in this dead town. Mason parked his car outside the diner. The moment he stepped out, he felt the air. It was cold, too cold for this time of year. A strange smell hung in the air, like something damp and old. He walked toward the diner. The glass door had a bell attached to it. When Mason pushed the door open, the bell rang, echoing loudly in the empty space. The diner was silent. No customers. No sound of cooking. The only noise was the soft hum of an old ceiling fan slowly spinning above. Mason looked around. Red leather seats, a long counter, and empty tables. It looked like something from the 1950s, never updated, never changed. Hello. Mason called out, his voice shaky. No answer. He waited, looking toward the kitchen door at the back. It was half open, but no one came out. Mason felt his heartbeat quicken. Why is it so empty? Then, faintly, he heard footsteps coming from the back room. Slow. Heavy. Getting closer. Mason swallowed hard. For the first time he thought, maybe stopping here was a mistake. The footsteps grew louder. Mason stared at the kitchen door, waiting for someone to appear. Finally, the door opened slowly. A man stepped out. He was tall and thin, with pale skin that almost looked gray under the dim lights. His clothes were clean but old-fashioned, like something from another time. The man's hair was slicked back, and his eyes. Mason froze when he saw them. They were pale, almost white, like all the color had drained out. The man smiled. But the smile was wrong, too wide, too forced. You're not from around here, are you? The man said in a slow, calm voice. Mason tried to laugh lightly. No. Just passing through. My car's low on gas. I was hoping to find a station. The man tilted his head slightly, still smiling. Gas? Yes, we can help with that. He walked behind the counter and placed his thin hands on it, leaning forward. His fingernails were too long, yellow at the tips. But first, the man's voice dropped lower, softer, almost like a whisper. You should eat something. It's a long drive. You'll need your strength. Mason felt a chill run down his spine. The way the man said it didn't sound like a friendly suggestion. It sounded like an order. "Oh, I'm sure," Mason said, trying to stay calm. He sat at the counter. The man's name tag caught Mason's eye. It said Silas. Silas turned slowly and walked into the kitchen. Mason heard strange noises, knives clinking, a door creaking. It didn't sound like normal cooking. Mason tapped his fingers nervously on the counter. He wanted to leave, but something told him that leaving now might be dangerous. Then, just as Mason looked toward the kitchen again, the bell above the diner door rang. Someone else had come in. It was a young woman. Her hair was messy, and her eyes were wide, full of fear. She didn't look at Mason. She just walked quickly to the farthest seat and sat down. And then, without even turning her head, she whispered, "Leave. Leave before they find out." Mason froze. His heart stopped for a second. What does she mean? Who are they? Before Mason could ask her anything, Silas returned from the kitchen. And the young woman went completely silent. Silas placed a plate in front of Mason. It was a sandwich, plain, but the smell was strange, like something old. Mason forced a smile and said, "Thanks." Silas didn't answer. He just stood there, watching. His pale eyes never blinked. After a long moment, he slowly turned and walked back to the kitchen. Mason let out a shaky breath. He didn't want to eat it, but he also didn't want to make Silas angry. So he pretended to take a bite, holding the sandwich in his hands. That's when he remembered the young woman. He turned his head slightly and looked at her. She was sitting 2 seats away, staring down at the counter, her hands trembling. Mason whispered, "What did you say?" The woman didn't look up. Her lips barely moved as she whispered again, "Leave. Leave before they find out." Mason felt a chill spread across his body. Who are they?" he asked softly. Finally, she looked at him, and Mason almost dropped the sandwich. Her eyes were red, like she had been crying for days. Her face was pale, and her lips were dry and cracked. "They don't let anyone leave," she said in a shaky voice. "If they know you're here, you're not getting out." Mason's heart started pounding. "What are you talking about?" Before the woman could answer, the sound of footsteps came from the kitchen. Silas was coming back. The woman quickly looked down at her hands. Her whole body went stiff like a statue. She didn't speak another word. Silas appeared again, his pale smile wider than before. He glanced at Mason, then at the woman, his cold eyes narrowing for a second. "Everything okay here?" Silas asked slowly. Mason swallowed hard. "Why, yeah, everything's fine." Silas just stared at him for a few seconds too long. Then, still smiling, he said, "Good. You'll be staying a while." Mason's stomach dropped. Staying a while? What does that mean? Mason left the diner as soon as he could. He didn't finish the food. He just paid quickly and walked out. The cold air hit him the moment he stepped outside. He glanced back at the diner. Through the glass, he saw Silas still standing at the counter, staring at him with that same empty smile. Mason quickly looked away and got into his car. His only thought, gas. "I just need gas and I'm leaving this place." He started the car and drove down the main road. The town looked even stranger now. Every house had dark windows, and some had strange symbols carved into the doors. Mason tried not to look too closely. Finally, he saw a small gas station at the end of the road. A single lamp flickered above the pumps. The station looked abandoned, old, dusty, and falling apart. But Mason had no choice. He parked his car and got out. "Hello," he called out, looking around. No answer. Then, from inside the small station building, a man stepped out. He was tall and broad, with a deep scar running from his ear to his chin. His skin was pale, like everyone else Mason had seen so far. His eyes were cloudy, almost white. The man wore a dirty work shirt with a name tag that said Reeve. Mason tried to sound calm. "Hey, I just need some gas. Can you help me out?" Reeve stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, slow and strange, just like Silas. "No gas tonight," Reeve said in a low voice. Mason frowned. "What? No gas? Are you kidding me? Look, I'll pay double. I just need enough to get to the next town." Reeve shook his head slowly. Told you no gas tonight. Mason felt his chest tighten. Something about the way Reeve said it didn't feel like the pumps were empty. It felt like they didn't want him to leave. Okay, is there a motel nearby? Mason asked, trying to stay calm. Reeve smiled wider. His teeth looked yellow, almost sharp. Oh yes, you'll find a place. He pointed down the road with a long finger. Keep driving. You'll see it. Mason stared at him for a second. The way Reeve said it made his stomach turn. But he nodded and walked back to his car. As Mason drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Reeve was still standing there, watching him, and smiling. The road grew darker as Mason drove farther. The town seemed empty, almost dead. No streetlights, no cars, no people, just silence. Finally, he saw it. An old motel on the side of the road. A broken neon sign flickered weakly, spelling the word motel in half-burned letters. The building looked like it hadn't been painted in years. The windows were dirty, and the parking lot was cracked and full of weeds. Mason parked his car and stepped out. The air felt heavier here. Cold. Still. Not a single sound except the buzzing of the broken neon sign. He walked to the entrance. The glass door had a small bell, just like the diner. When Mason pushed it open, the bell rang loudly in the empty lobby. The place smelled old. Dust, damp carpet, and something else, something sour. At the front desk sat an old woman. Her back was bent, and her gray hair hung in thin strands. Her face was pale, her lips colorless. She wore a dark dress that looked older than Mason's parents. The woman didn't greet him. She didn't even blink. She just stared with wide, cloudy eyes, like she had been waiting for him. I need a room, Mason said quietly. The woman slowly reached under the counter and placed a rusty key in front of him. Her hand shook slightly, but her face never changed. How much? Mason asked, pulling out his wallet. The woman didn't answer. She just stared. Her lips opened slowly, and in a dry whisper she said, "You'll be safe in your room." Mason felt a shiver run down his spine. He left the money on the counter, grabbed the key, and walked quickly down the hallway. The hallway was narrow, with dim yellow lights that flickered every few seconds. The wallpaper was peeling, and the carpet was stained. Mason stopped at his door, room 6. He put the key in and turned it. The lock clicked loudly. When Mason stepped inside, something caught his eye immediately. The lock was on the outside of the door, not the inside. His hands went cold. Why would a room lock from the outside? Mason turned slowly and looked back down the hallway. The old woman was still at the desk, staring straight at him. Mason closed the door behind him and stood still for a moment. The room was small, just one bed, a nightstand, and a cracked mirror on the wall. The wallpaper was peeling, and the smell was worse inside, like mold mixed with something rotten. He dropped his bag on the bed and sat down, trying to calm himself. It's just one night. In the morning, I'll figure something out and get out of here, he told himself. But deep down he wasn't so sure anymore. Everything about this town felt wrong. Mason lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The light above flickered softly. His eyes grew heavy, and for a moment, he thought he might fall asleep. Then he heard it. A whisper. At first, it was so faint he thought he imagined it. But then it came again, soft voices, just outside his door. He held his breath and listened. Don't let him leave. Not like the others. Mason froze. His heart pounded in his chest. Another voice joined in, lower and harsher. Tonight. The circle is ready. Mason sat up slowly. He looked at the door. The sound was definitely coming from the hallway. He tiptoed to the door and pressed his ear against it. More voices now. Men. Women. All whispering at once, in words he couldn't understand. It sounded like chanting. Then footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Moving toward his door. Mason backed away quickly. He looked around the room, his mind racing. There was no back door. The window was his only way out. He ran to it and pulled the curtain. Outside in the parking lot, he saw something that made his stomach twist. The townspeople. At least 20 of them. Standing in a circle, each holding a candle. Their faces were blank. Their eyes, glowing faintly in the dark. and in the center of the circle, something moved. Something big. Something not human. Mason stumbled back from the window, his breath shaking. The whispers outside his door grew louder. They were coming for him. Mason's heart pounded like a drum. He stared at the door, hearing the whispers turn into low chanting. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow, heavy, deliberate. He backed away, eyes darting around the room. There was no back door. No escape except the window. Mason ran to the window and tried to open it. It didn't budge. He pulled harder, his palms sweating. The old wooden frame groaned, then finally gave way with a loud creak. He froze. The chanting outside the door stopped. For a long second, everything was silent. Then a knock. Slow and steady. Knock, knock, knock. Mason, a voice called softly. It wasn't Silas. It wasn't the old woman. This voice sounded deeper, wrong. Mason didn't answer. He shoved the window open and climbed out, landing hard on the cold ground outside. He crouched low and looked around. The circle of townspeople was still in the parking lot, their candles glowing in the dark. They hadn't seen him yet. Quietly, Mason ran toward his car. His breath came fast and heavy. Every step sounded too loud in the silence. He reached the car, yanked the door open, and jumped inside. His hands shook as he shoved the key into the ignition. Come on, he whispered, turning the key. The engine coughed, clicked, but didn't start. No. Mason slammed his hand on the steering wheel and tried again. Nothing. The car was dead. He looked up and froze. The townspeople were no longer in the circle. They were standing around his car. All of them, staring at him with glowing eyes. Their faces were blank, their mouths slightly open, as if waiting for something. Then slowly, they began to move closer. Mason locked the doors and looked around desperately. He spotted the woods behind the motel. Without thinking, he flung the door open and ran as fast as he could into the trees. His breath tore through his lungs. Behind him, he heard footsteps, dozens of them, chasing him, moving faster and faster. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He just ran. Branches whipped against his face. The forest was endless. But Mason kept running, thinking, if I can just get far enough, I can escape. He didn't know. Hollow Creek wouldn't let him. Mason ran until his legs burned. The forest seemed endless, the trees twisting like black claws under the moonlight. His breath came in sharp gasps, and his chest ached, but he didn't stop. Finally, he saw something ahead, a road. Relief flooded through him. He stumbled out of the woods and fell onto the gravel. He lay there for a moment, panting. Then he looked up, and his blood turned cold. Right in front of him stood a wooden sign. Old, cracked, with peeling paint. The same one he saw hours ago. Welcome to Hollow Creek. No, this can't be real, Mason whispered. He looked behind him. The forest was still there. He had been running straight, but somehow he was back where he started. Panic surged through him. He ran down the road as fast as he could. His legs felt like lead, but he didn't care. He had to keep moving. Minutes passed. Then hours. Or at least, it felt like hours. The night never seemed to end. And then headlights. Mason's heart leaped. A car was coming. He ran into the middle of the road, waving his arms. Help. Please help me, he screamed. The car slowed and stopped a few feet away. Mason ran to the driver's side, tears in his eyes. Please. You have to help me. They're after me. I need to get out of here. The driver slowly turned his head. It was a man, pale skin, cloudy eyes, the same blank stare as the others. Mason stumbled back. The car door opened, and the man stepped out. Behind him, more figures emerged from the darkness. Men. Women. All of them from the town. They surrounded Mason, their faces glowing faintly under the moonlight. He backed away, trembling. Stay away from me. Then from the group, someone stepped forward. It was Silas, the diner man. His smile was wider than ever. You shouldn't have run, Silas said softly. You belong here now. Mason shook his head, tears streaming down his face. No, I'm leaving. Silas chuckled. A low, hollow sound. No one leaves Hollow Creek. Ever. And then, everything went dark. The next morning, the sun rose over Hollow Creek. The streets were still quiet, the same eerie silence hanging in the air. The diner's neon sign buzzed softly, glowing open like always. Inside, everything looked the same: red booths, shiny counter, and the smell of old coffee. Silas stood behind the counter, smiling that same pale smile. His cloudy eyes looked calm, like nothing had happened the night before. The bell above the door rang as a man walked in. He looked tired, confused, just like Mason had when he first arrived. Silas smiled at him warmly. "Welcome to Hollow Creek," he said slowly. "You're not from around here, are you?" The man shook his head nervously. "No. Just passing through." "Of course," Silas said, his voice soft like silk. "Why don't you sit down? You should eat something first." The stranger nodded and walked to the counter. He sat down, unaware of the pale figure sitting at the very end of the counter, head bowed low, silent. That figure was Mason. His once bright eyes were now empty and lifeless. His skin was pale like the others. His lips didn't move. He just stared at the counter, breathing slowly. He wasn't leaving Hollow Creek. No one ever does. Outside the diner, the old wooden sign creaked in the wind. The words "Welcome to Hollow Creek" were barely visible under the peeling paint. And somewhere deep in the woods, the circle was ready again. The town was waiting for the next outsider.